My name is Avery Wilder. I'm 22 years old. And for most of my life, I believe betrayal was something you could hear coming. Loud, messy, obvious enough that even if it shattered you, at least you'd know exactly when it happened. I thought there would be a moment, a clear line, something you could point to and say, there, that's when everything ended. I was wrong, because the worst kind of betrayal doesn't arrive like a storm. It sits quietly in a drawer, waits patiently, and lets you build your entire life on top of it before it decides to be found. Every Sunday for 19 years, I visited my father. The same building, the same hallway that smelled like antiseptic and something older I never wanted to identify. The same room at the end of the ward where machines breathed for a man who hadn't opened his eyes since I was 3. I would bring flowers sometimes, cheap ones, grocery store bouquets with plastic wrapping that crinkled too loudly in the silence. I'd sit beside his bed, take his hand, always warm, always still, and read to him. Books, articles, sometimes just things about my life. I told him about school, about friends, about the small, ordinary details that made up a life he wasn't part of anymore. Because I believed he would have cared. Because I believed he was a good man who had been taken from us. A victim. That's what my mother told me. Your father was in an accident, she used to say, her voice soft in that practiced way that made pain sound almost gentle. A terrible accident, a drunk driver on Route 4. He never had a chance. And then her expression would change. Just slightly. Not sadness anymore. Something sharper. And your uncle? She'd continue, like the word itself tasted bitter. He abandoned us. Took everything your grandfather built and left your father in a hospital we couldn't afford. That was the story. Simple, clean, easy to understand. Father, good. Uncle, bad. And me? I believed it without question. Why wouldn't I? My mother cried when she told it. Real tears. The kind that shook her shoulders. The kind you don't fake for 19 years. She raised me alone, worked 2 jobs, came home exhausted, but still asked about my day. We lived in a small apartment above a laundromat that rattled every time the industrial dryer spun. I used to think the whole world sounded like that. Constant, low, vibrating noise. Like something underneath everything. Always slightly off. I had never met my uncle. Never spoken to him. Never seen a photo that wasn't torn or hidden away. His name, Benjamin Wilder, existed in my life like a warning. Don't trust him. Don't believe anything about him. He left us. So I hated him. The way children hate when they're handed a target and told exactly where to aim. 3 months ago, everything changed. It started with something stupid. Financial aid forms. I needed documents. Birth certificate, tax records, things my mother kept locked away in a metal filing cabinet in her closet. She had one rule. Always the same. Don't open the bottom drawer. Family documents, off limits. But that afternoon, sitting on her bedroom floor, surrounded by application deadlines and forms I didn't understand, I told myself it didn't matter. I needed my birth certificate. That was all. Just one paper. The drawer opened easier than I expected. No resistance. No dramatic moment. Just a quiet slide. Inside were 4 folders. Red, blue, yellow, green. Neatly labeled. Too neatly. Like someone had organized the truth, but hoped no one would ever read it. I reached for the red one first. It felt appropriate. Like starting with something that might hurt. The label read, Benjamin, my uncle. The man I had hated my entire life. Inside was a divorce decree. Not my parents'. His. Filed 23 years ago. The name of his wife, Adriana Wilder. And undergrounds for divorce. Adultery. I remember reading that word 3 times. Slowly. Carefully. Like maybe if I looked at it long enough, it would change. It didn't. And then I saw the name listed as the other party. The person she had the affair with. Marcus Wilder. My father. The room didn't spin. There was no dramatic collapse. Just silence. The kind that presses in from all sides until you can hear your own heartbeat like something foreign inside your chest. I sat there on the floor, holding a document that quietly erased 19 years of certainty. My father wasn't the victim. He was the reason everything broke. And that was only the first folder. I should have stopped, closed the drawer, put everything back, pretended I never saw it. But something inside me had already shifted. A small, irreversible crack. And once something cracks, you don't get to decide how far it spreads. So I reached for the blue folder. And that's when the numbers started telling a story no one ever said out loud. The blue folder was labeled Finances. Even before I opened it, I knew whatever was inside would be ugly. Not emotional ugly. Not dramatic ugly. Worse. Precise ugly. The kind that comes with dates and totals and signatures. The kind that doesn't care how badly you want it to mean something else. Inside were bank statements from 22 years ago, not just one account. 3. A joint business account, a personal savings account in my grandfather's name, an investment account managed by Benjamin. My grandfather, Gregory Wilder, had built a commercial plumbing company from nothing. Wilder and Sons, 30 years of work, 30 years of crawl spaces, frozen pipes, late-night emergency calls, payrolls, trucks, contracts, and calloused hands. By the time he died, the company was worth over $1 million. He left it to his 2 sons equally, Marcus and Benjamin, 50-50. But Benjamin had been named executive because he handled the numbers, the legal side, the structure. My father was the one in the field, the fast one, the charismatic one, the one who knew how to talk to clients and finish jobs and make people laugh at job sites. Benjamin was the one who made sure the lights stayed on, and according to everything I had been told, he had used that power to destroy us. Except the papers in my hand were already telling a different story. The statements began 6 months after my grandfather's funeral, before the accident, before the coma, before the version of my family I had been raised inside. At first, the charges looked ordinary. Fuel, equipment, supplier invoices, routine business expenses. Then they changed. Hotel charge, $189. The next Tuesday, another one. The Tuesday after that, another. For 3 months. Same hotel chain, same amount, same day of the week. Every Tuesday. I stared at the dates, then at the transaction details, then back at the dates again. My father had supposedly been out on job sites on Tuesdays. That was how the schedule usually worked. My mother used to say he preferred Tuesdays because they were good money days. I remembered her saying it once with a faint smile, like she was recalling some sweet little quirk. Now all I could see were hotel rooms. $189 a night, every Tuesday. Not random, not impulsive, routine. There were dinner charges too, upscale restaurants downtown, always for amounts that were just a little too high for one person. Then a jewelry purchase, $680. A bracelet. I knew instantly it had never been for my mother. I could picture every bracelet she'd ever owned. Thin silver one from a department store, a plain gold one she wore on holidays, a cheap charm bracelet I bought her at 14 with money from a summer job. Nothing like this. Nothing that cost $680. Because it wasn't meant for her. The most painful part wasn't even the betrayal itself. It was the repetition. The calmness of it. Hotel, dinner, gift. Hotel, dinner, hotel. An affair doesn't feel like one terrible moment when you see it laid out on paper. It looks like scheduling, planning, budgeting. Like love turned into bookkeeping. I kept flipping through the statements until the numbers blurred, but the pattern never did. And for the first time in my life, I understood exactly how Benjamin had found out. He didn't catch them because he was suspicious or cruel. He caught them because he was doing his job. He managed the accounts. He reconciled expenses. He looked at what was spent and where it went. My father had used the company card to finance the affair with his brother's wife, and Benjamin had watched it happen line by line, quietly, methodically, probably hoping the first strange charge was an error, then realizing it wasn't. I put the blue folder down with shaking hands and picked up the yellow one. Legal. By then my mouth had gone dry. Inside were printouts of text messages, old ones, faded, printed from screenshots. The ink had softened over time, but the words were still there. Still sharp enough. The first text was from Benjamin. I know about Adriana. I have the hotel receipts. I have the jewelry charge. Don't deny it. My father's response came minutes later. Ben, let me explain. It wasn't planned. It just happened. I actually laughed when I read that. Not because it was funny. Because sometimes the truth is so pathetic, your body doesn't know what else to do. It just happened. As if 5 months of hotel reservations happened accidentally. As if a standing Tuesday affair happened like bad weather. Benjamin's next message was colder. $189 every Tuesday for 3 months isn't something that just happens. That's a standing reservation. How long? There was a pause of several hours before my father answered. 4 months, maybe 5. Maybe 5. I pressed my thumb so hard into the paper it almost tore. Maybe 5. Like he didn't remember exactly how long he had been sleeping with his brother's wife. Like betrayal was fuzzy around the edges. Benjamin's next message looked like a blade. 5 months with my wife in hotels paid for by our father's company, while I managed the accounts you were stealing from. My father replied, I wasn't stealing. I used the business card. I'll pay it back. I read that line twice. The audacity of it. Not I'm sorry. Not I was wrong. Not I destroyed everything. Just the cheap instinct to rename what he'd done. As if theft changed shape if you said the sentence softly enough. Benjamin didn't let him hide in language. You'll pay it back? $4,800 in hotel charges, $680 bracelet, $1,200 in dinners, $6,680 total. You financed an affair with my wife using the business our father built. That isn't just adultery, that's theft. There it was. Clean, measured, final. The truth my mother had buried for 19 years. Not rage, not revenge, accounting. My father's next message was the one that made me close my eyes. What do you want me to do? What do you want me to do? Even then, he sounded like the injured party, like this was an inconvenience happening to him instead of a consequence created by him. Benjamin answered exactly once more. I want you to understand what happens next. I am filing for divorce from Adriana. I'm dissolving the business partnership. And I'm exercising my right as executive to liquidate the estate assets and distribute according to fair market value. That means I control the timing, the accounts, the process. Everything goes through me. My father replied immediately, You can't take everything. Benjamin's answer was the last in the exchange. I'm not taking everything. I'm following the legal process our father set up, the process that puts me in charge of every dollar. You should have thought about that before you slept with my wife and paid for it with our father's money. That was it. No insults, no threats, no melodrama, just a man closing a door. I set the yellow folder down and stared at the wall for a long time. I had spent my whole life imagining my uncle as some greedy, heartless villain who tore the family apart because he was jealous of my father. But there, in black and white, was the opposite. Benjamin had been betrayed twice, by his wife, by his brother, and instead of exploding, he had become colder than grief, colder than rage. He had turned procedural. Maybe that's what survival looks like when the people who should have loved you make you feel stupid for ever trusting them. My hands were trembling when I reached for the green folder. It was labeled After. Inside was a handwritten letter. 12 pages. Addressed to my mother. Dated the year of the accident. I recognized immediately that it was the kind of letter people only write when they know their version is going to be buried if they don't pin it down on paper. I unfolded the first page carefully. The handwriting was neat, controlled. No scribbled anger, no scratch marks, no places where the pen seemed to stab through the paper. It began, Blythe, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I want you to know what happened and why. I want you to have the truth because Marcus won't give it to you and your family won't either. I kept reading. Benjamin wrote that Marcus had slept with Adriana for 5 months, that he had used the company account to pay for hotels, dinners, and gifts, that Benjamin discovered it through the estate records because he was the executive handling all expenses pending final asset distribution. He explained what he did next, not emotionally, procedurally. He transferred the remaining business operating capital, $340,000, into an estate holding account under his sole legal control. He liquidated the equipment, 6 trucks, 4 trailers, tools, inventory, sold through a licensed broker for fair market value. He sold the commercial property the business had operated from for $420,000. All proceeds into the holding account. Total liquidated value, $940,000. Then he distributed Marcus's legal half, $470,000, deposited directly into my father's personal account. The letter said that account had contained barely $2,000 before the transfer. And then came the sentence that seemed to split my life cleanly in two. The $470,000 sat in his account for 11 days before he wrapped his truck around a utility pole at 2 a.m. with a blood alcohol level of 0.19. I stopped breathing for a second, not because I didn't understand the words, because I did. My father had not been destroyed by his brother. He had been handed nearly $500,000. Then he drank. Then he drove. Then he crashed. And all my life, I had been taught to tell that story backwards. The next lines were even harder. I didn't cause the accident. I didn't cause the drinking. I didn't cause the coma. Marcus drove drunk because Marcus had been making selfish decisions long before the night he crashed. What I did do was exercise my legal right to dissolve a partnership with a man who used our father's business to finance an affair with my wife. Every dollar I moved was documented. Every sale was at market value. Every action was reviewed by an attorney and filed with probate court. I am not the villain in this story. Marcus is. But I know I will become the villain the moment I leave, because the person who goes is always easier to hate than the person who stays broken in front of you. I read that paragraph 3 times, because it was true, painfully, viciously true. The person who leaves is easier to hate, The person who stays in a hospital bed with tubes and wires and silence, he gets to become tragic, softened, mythologized, cleaned up by time and pity. The person who walks away with his dignity intact becomes cruel by default. Benjamin knew that. He knew exactly what would happen once he left town, and somehow he had still written the truth down anyway. Toward the end, the letter changed. Not softer, sadder. Avery deserves to know the truth someday. Not now. She's 3. But someday, keep this letter or destroy it. That choice is yours. But if you destroy it, you are choosing to let your daughter grow up hating a man who did nothing wrong except marry a woman who loved his brother more and have a brother who valued appetite over loyalty. He signed it simply. Ben. No flourish. No plea. Just a name at the bottom of the truth. My mother had kept the letter. She hadn't destroyed it. That should have mattered more than it did. But in that moment, all I could think was, she kept the truth without giving it to me. She hid it carefully. Preserved it almost lovingly. Like evidence she couldn't bear to throw away, and couldn't bear to let me see. I don't know how long I sat there on her bedroom floor after that. Long enough for the late afternoon light to shift. Long enough for my legs to go numb. Long enough to feel like the version of me that had woken up that morning had quietly ceased to exist. When I finally stood up, the folders felt heavier than paper should. I carried them to the kitchen. My mother was chopping onions. That's what I remember most. Not the knife. Not the sound. Just the ordinary intimacy of it. The smell of onions in oil, the pan warming on the stove, a dish towel over her shoulder, a radio humming something soft and forgettable in the background. The normality of it made what I was about to say feel insane, like detonating something in the middle of dinner prep. She looked up when I walked in, saw the folders in my hands, and froze. Not surprise. Recognition. The expression of someone who has spent years fearing one exact moment and knows instantly when it has arrived. I set the folders on the counter between us. Mom, I said, and even to me, my voice sounded unfamiliar. I found them. Her hand tightened around the knife handle. For a second, she didn't speak. Then she said very quietly, "You weren't supposed to open that drawer." I almost admired the sentence. Not what it meant, just the instinct of it. Not, "What did you read?" Not, "We need to talk." Not, "I'm sorry." Just, "You weren't supposed to know." I looked at her, really looked at her. The woman who raised me. The woman who packed my lunches and braided my hair when I was little and rubbed my back when I had fevers. The woman who worked double shifts and paid bills and drove me every Sunday to visit the man she had helped turn into a saint. And I realized love and deception can live in the same body so easily it should terrify everyone. Dad slept with Ben's wife, I said. The knife made a soft sound as she set it down on the cutting board. I kept going before she could interrupt. For 5 months. He used Grandpa's business account to pay for hotels and dinners and jewelry. Ben found out because he managed the estate accounts. He dissolved the partnership legally. He liquidated everything legally. He gave Dad his full share, $470,000. Dad got drunk, drove into a pole, and ended up in that bed. Her face changed as I spoke, not because any of it was news, because hearing it out loud made the lie harder to hold. Tiredness settled into her features. The kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from one bad day, but from carrying the wrong story for too long. It's more complicated than what's in those folders, she whispered. No, I said. It isn't. Avery. No, it isn't. I heard my own voice rising and barely recognized it. Not shrill, not wild, just sharper than I had ever allowed it to be with her. You told me Ben abandoned us. You told me he stole everything. You told me he left Dad to rot. But he didn't steal anything. He followed the legal process Grandpa set up. He gave Dad his half. Dad destroyed himself. She started crying then. Not the dramatic crying I remembered from childhood stories about Benjamin. Not the trembling performance of grief that had shaped my idea of him. This was smaller, more dangerous. The crying of a person who has run out of places to hide. He left us with nothing, she said. I could not believe it. Even then. Even now. He left Dad with $470,000, I said. Dad left us with nothing. There's a difference. She covered her face for a moment. When she looked up, her eyes were red. Your father loved you. Something in me went cold. I had expected denial, deflection, maybe even anger. I had not expected that line. As if love could erase what he had done. As if fatherhood canceled theft and betrayal and drunk driving. As if me loving the idea of him for 19 years somehow made him innocent. My father loved Adriana, I said. He loved hotel rooms on Tuesdays. He loved a bracelet that cost $680 and wasn't for his wife. He loved everything except loyalty. That's not fair. No, I said. What wasn't fair was letting me hate the wrong person my entire life. She sank into a chair at the kitchen table like her bones had given up. I stayed standing. "Where is Ben?" I asked. She looked up too fast. And that was answer enough. "I don't know." "You're lying." "Avery, I'm not." "You are." I stepped closer. "He sent this letter here. He knew where you lived. You never moved. Did he ever try to contact me?" Silence. Not long, but long enough. And in families like mine, silence was never empty. It was where the bodies were buried. Finally, she said, "Once." My throat tightened. "Once, when you were 7, he sent a letter addressed to you." Everything in the room seemed to stop. "What happened to it?" She looked down. I threw it away. I stared at her. My own mother. A letter to me. From the man I had been taught to hate before I was old enough to question why. Thrown away. Not opened. Not answered. Erased. What did it say? "I don't know." "You didn't read it?" "No." "Why?" Her voice broke on the last word. "Because I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" She lifted her eyes to mine, and for the first time that night, she said the real thing. "Of losing you." I shook my head slowly. "No," I said, "you were afraid of the truth." That landed. I saw it land. A flinch. A swallowed breath. A look that said she had been waiting years for someone to say exactly that. "You didn't lose me to Ben," I said. "You lost me to a locked drawer." And then I walked out. Not because I was finished. Because I wasn't. Because if I stayed another minute, I would either start screaming or start crying, and I refused to let the first true thing in my life dissolve into either one. I went to my room, shut the door, sat on the edge of my bed, and stared at the wall until the panic inside me turned into something else. Something cleaner. Direction. I opened my laptop, and for the first time in my life, I looked for my uncle. It took me 2 weeks to find him. Not because he was hiding, because I had no idea where to begin. For 19 years, Benjamin Wilder had existed in my life as a story, not a person. No address, no phone number, no photos that weren't half-torn or deliberately tucked away like something dangerous. Just a name. And now that name felt different. Not poisoned anymore. Heavy. Real. I started with the only thing that had ever connected us outside of blood, the business. Wilder and Sons, liquidated 22 years ago. Dead on paper. But paperwork doesn't disappear. It just gets archived. I searched the state business registry, scrolling through filings that looked like they belonged to someone else's life. There it was, dissolution records, asset transfers, legal confirmations. Everything Benjamin had written in that letter was there. Filed. Stamped. Approved. Documented truth sitting in a public database while I spent my childhood believing a lie in a kitchen that smelled like onions and survival. There was a name attached to the legal filings. An attorney. Harold Drummond. The firm still existed. I stared at the number for a long time before dialing. My hand hovered over the screen, like the act itself might undo something I couldn't put back together. Then I pressed call. "Drummond and Associates," a woman answered, polite, practiced. "Hi," I said, and my voice felt too loud in my own ears. "I'm looking for someone who handled a case about 22 years ago, Benjamin Wilder." A pause. "I'm sorry, Mr. Drummond retired 5 years ago." Of course he did. Why would anything about this be easy? "Is there anyone else who might—" "Let me see if I can connect you to someone," she said. Soft hold music filled the silence. I stared at the wall again. It was becoming a habit, staring at blank spaces while my life rearranged itself behind my eyes. A new voice came on. "Hi, this is Daniel Reeves, junior partner. How can I help?" I explained. "Not everything. Just enough." "I'm his niece," I said. "I haven't seen him since I was 3. I recently found some documents. I'm trying to reach him." There was a pause on the other end. Not suspicious. "Careful. I can't share client information," he said. Measured, professional. "But I can tell you Mr. Wilder is alive, and I have a general idea of where he relocated." My heart stuttered. Alive. That word shouldn't have meant so much. But it did. "If you write a letter," he continued, "and bring it to our office, I can forward it to the last address we have on file." A letter, not a phone call. Not immediate. Something slower, more intentional. I swallowed. "That would help, thank you." I wrote the letter that night. 3 pages. And I rewrote the first paragraph 6 times. Because how do you start a conversation with someone you've spent your entire life hating, only to realize they might have been the only honest person in your family? I sat at my desk, the green folder open beside me like a witness. Then I started writing. "Dear Ben," I stopped. Not Uncle. Not Mr. Wilder. Just Ben. It felt honest, like I was meeting him as a person, not a role I had been assigned. I told him who I was, that I had found the folders, that I knew about the affair, the money, the business, the accident, the truth. I told him I didn't hate him anymore, that I never should have, that I had spent 19 years holding my father's hand in a hospital bed, believing he was a victim, when he was the one who had broken everything. I didn't apologize for my father. That wasn't mine to give. But I acknowledged what had been done to him, to Ben, to his life, to his marriage. And I wrote the sentence that mattered most. If you're willing, I'd like to meet you. Not to fix anything, not to rewrite the past, just to hear your story in your voice. I signed it simply. Avery, no last name. He already knew that part. I dropped it off at the law office on a Thursday afternoon. The same receptionist, the same polite smile. This will be forwarded today, she said. I nodded, walked out. And then came the worst part. Waiting. 9 days. 9 days of checking my phone every hour. 9 days of telling myself he might not respond. Why would he? I was the daughter of the man who had betrayed him. The child raised on a version of the story that painted him as a villain. The silence stretched. Heavy. Then on the 9th day, my phone rang. Unknown number. My hand froze above the screen. Then I answered. Hello? A pause. Then a voice. Low. Steady. Familiar in a way that made no sense. Is this Avery? My throat closed. Yes. Another pause. And then, this is Ben. I didn't speak. Not because I was emotional. Because my brain was trying to catch up to reality. The man I had hated my entire life was on the phone. And his voice. It sounded like something I recognized. Not from memory. From something deeper. Genetics. He sounded like what my father might have sounded like, if my father had been a different man. I got your letter, he said. I read it 4 times. 4. That number hit harder than anything else. Not once. Not quickly. Carefully. Like it mattered. I wasn't sure if I should call, he continued. I've thought about it for 22 years. My fingers tightened around the phone. Why didn't you? A small exhale on the other end. Because your mother made it clear I wasn't welcome in your life. I closed my eyes. She threw away your letter when I was 7. Silence. Longer this time. Then, I figured, no anger. No surprise. Just quiet confirmation. I sent it registered, he said. Got confirmation it was delivered. Never heard anything back. I assumed she told you about me, and you chose her version. I didn't choose anything, I said quickly. I was 7. I didn't know there was another version. I know. His voice softened slightly. And I'm sorry, I should have tried harder. You were dealing with everything, I said. The divorce, the business, my dad. My brother, he corrected gently. That word landed differently now. Not your father. Not distance. Ownership. Pain that still belonged to him. I was 33, he continued. My marriage was over. The business was gone. My brother was in a coma, and I just left. I didn't have anything left in that town that didn't hurt. Where did you go? Asheville, he said. Started over. Built a small contracting company. Got married again. Had a daughter. A daughter. My cousin. A whole life I didn't know existed. Did you forget about me? I asked. It came out before I could stop it. Honest. Unfiltered. There was a soft sound on the other end. Not quite a laugh. No, he said. You don't forget a child you helped name. I blinked. What? I named you, he said simply. The room tilted. My father wanted to name you Tyler. I said no. Avery sounded stronger. He agreed. I sat down slowly on the edge of my bed. You named me? One of the last things we agreed on, he said, before everything broke. I didn't know what to do with that. The man I had been taught to hate chose my name, gave me the word I had answered to my entire life, and no one had ever told me. Can I come see you? I asked. The question felt fragile, like something that could shatter if he hesitated. But he didn't. Anytime, he said. No pause. No conditions. Just that. Are you sure? I have a room in my house that's been empty for 22 years, he said. It was supposed to be yours. Weekends, holidays. I built shelves for you when you were born. My chest tightened. They're still empty, he added. Never put anything on them. Empty. For 22 years. Waiting. For what? I whispered. For you, he said. I drove to Asheville 2 weeks later. 6 hours. No music. No distractions. Just the road stretching out in front of me, and the quiet realization that I was driving toward a version of my life that had been taken from me before I even knew it existed. His house sat on a hill. Clean. Solid. The kind of place built by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. He was on the porch when I pulled in. 55. Gray at the temples. Broad shoulders. Hands that looked like they had built things their entire life. For a second, just a second, I saw my father. Not the man in the hospital bed. The man he must have been before everything fell apart. Ben stepped forward slightly. Stopped, like he wasn't sure what the right distance was. You look like him, he said. A pause. Before. Before. That word held more weight than anything else he could have said. When was he good? I asked quietly. Ben looked out toward the trees for a moment. Before Adriana, he said. Before the drinking. Before the hotel receipts. His jaw tightened slightly. He was my best friend. That sentence hurt more than anything in the folders, because it meant something real had been destroyed. Not just a marriage. Not just a business. A relationship. We built houses together every Saturday, Ben continued. He could frame a wall faster than anyone I've ever seen. He looked back at me. He was good, he said. Then softer. And then he wasn't. We sat on the porch for hours. And for the first time in my life, I heard the story without distortion. We sat on that porch for 4 hours. No raised voices, no dramatic pauses meant to impress. Just truth. Steady. Measured. Almost quiet enough that if you weren't paying attention, you might miss how much it changed everything. Ben told me what the folders couldn't. Not just what happened, but how it felt. He didn't start out like that, Ben said, leaning back in his chair, eyes fixed somewhere past the trees. Marcus wasn't always the guy in those documents. I didn't interrupt. He was the one everyone liked, he continued. Easygoing, funny. People trusted him. He could walk onto a job site and have a crew laughing in 5 minutes. A pause. I handled the money because I was better at it. He handled people because he was better at that. It sounded like balance, like something that could have lasted. Then things started shifting, Ben said. Little stuff at first. Missed calls, late nights, jobs that didn't quite line up with invoices. Nothing you can accuse someone of. Just enough to make you feel like something's off. He glanced at me briefly. I didn't think it was my wife, he added. Not at first. I swallowed. Of course he didn't. Why would he? Trust doesn't expect to be broken from both sides at once. When I figured it out, he said, it wasn't one big moment. It was confirmation. That word again. Not betrayal. Confirmation. As soon as I knew, everything changed, he continued. Not just how I saw them, how I saw myself. Because the question isn't just how could they do this? He looked at me directly. It's how did I not see it sooner? That landed deeper than anything else. Because I understood that feeling now. I didn't yell, he said. Didn't fight. Didn't throw anything. I believed him. I handled it the only way I knew how. I followed the structure my father put in place. I made sure everything was clean, legal, documented. You made sure you couldn't be blamed, I said quietly. He gave a small nod. Exactly. Not defensive, just honest. People in town didn't see it that way, he added. They saw me liquidate everything and leave. That's all they needed. The villain who walked away, I said. Always is, he replied. Later, he introduced me to his wife, Renata. She opened the door like she already knew me. Not formally, not cautiously. Warm, like I had been expected. You must be Avery, she said. And before I could respond, she pulled me into a hug that felt steady. Not overwhelming, not performative, just real. Ben talks about you all the time, she added. I looked at him instinctively. He didn't look embarrassed, just quiet. Like it wasn't something he needed to explain. Then I met his daughter, Palmer, 14. Bright eyes, curious in that unfiltered way teenagers are before they learn to hide it. She looked at me for a second, then smiled. You're my cousin, she said, like she'd been waiting to say it out loud. I guess I am. I always wanted an older sister, she added, like it solved something. And just like that, a space I didn't know existed in my life, filled. I stayed 3 days, slept in the room at the end of the hallway, the one Ben had built for me. The shelves were exactly how he described them. Simple wood, hand-cut, sanded smooth, empty, not dusty, not forgotten, maintained, like absence had been preserved on purpose. On the second night, Ben said, "There's something I want to show you." We walked out to a small workshop behind the house. It smelled like sawdust and oil and thyme. Tools lined the walls, pegboards organized with a kind of quiet precision that felt familiar now. He went to a workbench, reached underneath, pulled out a wooden box. Handmade. Of course it was. He set it on the table between us and opened it. Inside were letters, stacked, carefully, 22 of them, each one labeled with a year, each one addressed to me. I didn't know if you'd ever read them, he said. His voice was steady, but something underneath it wasn't. So I wrote them anyway. I reached out slowly, picked up the first one. Age 1. My hands trembled. I opened it. Happy birthday, Avery. You're 1 today. I hope you're walking by now. I bet you are. Builders walk early. I let out a shaky breath. I helped name you. Avery means strength. I thought you'd need that. I hope you're strong. I hope your mom is taking care of you. I hope someday you'll understand why I left. I closed my eyes. The last line sat heavier than the rest. I hope you'll understand. I read all 22 letters that night. Some were short. Some were pages long. Some talked about his life, his work, his regrets. but every single one ended the same way. I hope you'll understand. By the time I finished, something inside me had shifted completely. Not broken, not shattered, rebuilt. I drove home the next day with the box on the passenger seat. 6 hours. No music. Just me and 22 years of something I had been denied. My mother was waiting in the kitchen when I walked in. Of course she was. She looked at my face once and knew. You found him, she said. I set the box down on the table. He found me 22 years ago, I replied. You just made sure I couldn't hear him. She flinched. Small, but real. Everything I did was to protect you, she said. I shook my head. You protected me from the truth, I said. That's not the same thing. Her eyes moved to the box. What's that? Proof, I said, that you weren't protecting me. You were controlling what I was allowed to know. I didn't stay for an argument. There was nothing left to argue about. The following Sunday, I went to the hospital for the first time in 19 years. Seeing. I didn't bring flowers. The hallway looked the same. The room looked the same. The machine sounded the same. My father looked the same, frozen in time, preserved in a version of himself that no longer matched the truth I carried. I sat down beside him. For a moment, I just looked, trying to reconcile the man in the bed with the man in the documents, the man in Ben's memories, the man in the letters. I know, I said finally. My voice sounded calm, stronger than I expected. I know about Adriana, the hotels, the bracelet, the money. The machines kept beeping, unchanged. I know Ben didn't steal anything. I know he gave you your share. I know what you did with it. Silence, the kind that no longer felt sacred. Just empty. I met him, I continued. He lives in Asheville. He has a wife, a daughter, a workshop, and a box of letters he wrote me every year. I swallowed. He named me, I added softly. That part still felt unreal. You knew that? No answer. Of course not. For 19 years. I had held his hand every Sunday, like it meant something, like it was an act of loyalty, of love, of belief. This time, I didn't reach for it. I'm not coming back next Sunday, I said. The words settled in the room. Final. Not angry. Not dramatic. Just decided. Not because I hate you, I added, because I spent 19 years hating the wrong person. I don't have room for more of that. I stood up slowly, looked at him one last time. The truth is, you're here because of what you did, not because of what Ben did. The machines continued their steady rhythm. Indifferent. I walked out of the room, down the hallway, through the double doors. Didn't look back. In the parking lot, I took out my phone. Called Ben. He answered on the second ring. He always answers on the second ring. Hey, he said. Simple. Easy. Like I belonged in that word. I went to see him, I said. A pause. Then, are you okay? I stopped walking. Because in 19 years, no one had ever asked me that. Not after the visits. Not after the silence. Not after the weight of loving someone who couldn't love me back. I'm okay, I said. And for the first time, it was true. I'm coming back next month, I added. If the room's still there. A small exhale on the other end. Relief. It is, he said. The shelves are still empty. I looked up at the sky. At the version of my life that had been waiting for me without my knowledge. Empty shelves. A box of letters. A name chosen by someone I was taught to hate. My mom gave me someone to blame, I said quietly. And Ben? He asked. I smiled. He gave me something to carry. I ended the call, stood there for a moment, then got in my car, and drove forward